is Bruce Houlihan. He is the director of the Orange County Crime Laboratory in Southern California. He is going to talk to us about LIMS in the 2020 decade. So Bruce, come up.
Thank you and good afternoon. Would you all do me a favor? Would you all stand real quick? You've been sitting for about an hour and I don't want to lose you. Stand real quick, don't leave. Just stand, then you can sit down. We're going to stretch a little bit. Thank you. Okay, you can sit down now. LIMS systems have become kind of the backbone of whatever we're doing in the crime laboratory. It's really impossible nowadays to have a good functioning laboratory without a good LIMS system. But this is not just in forensic science laboratories. This is in clinical labs, it's in environmental labs, and whether you may not call it LIMS, we have case management systems in the district attorney's offices, in our coroner's offices, in our medical examiner's offices. We really cannot do work without a good LIMS system. But we don't work for LIMS systems. The LIMS systems actually work for us, and sometimes it's easy to forget. I don't know if you've ever noticed in your laboratory with a LIMS system, your staff probably have started to personify the LIMS as a person, right? Well, LIMS told me to do this. I did this yesterday, and LIMS said it was not the right thing to do, right? It's an identity that we've actually developed simply because there's a point of intelligence for what we're actually doing in the laboratory. In shuffling data around, giving us information about what we're supposed to be doing with our instruments, we need to actually change this a little bit and make sure that our LIMS systems are doing what we want to do in the laboratory as scientists and not vice versa. They're also very, very complicated. But if there's a theme to what I want to say today is our LIMS systems need to be adaptable, customizable, and actually responsive to the changes that we actually want to see in the laboratory. So I don't want to talk about particular LIMS solutions. We have some great vendors that are here with us and supporting your laboratories, and that's not really my intent. But I do want to give you a little bit of context about where we are in Orange County. So we've had LIMS for about 30 years. We had a concurrent mainframe up to about the year 2000. In 2000, we made the decision to write our LIMS system ourselves. It took us a couple of years, and we've been developing it for about 18 years. Our backend is Microsoft SQL Server. We have about 500 gigabytes of data in the database right now, something on the order of 200 applications that our staff actually use, 2 million lines of code. We have about 300 clients in our LIMS system, about 160 staff, and another 150 instruments and devices that we actually have plugged into our LIMS system. And we publish a lot of websites for our clients, law enforcement, property management systems, the defense, and even the public for some of our stuff. By doing it in-house, we actually gave ourselves a lot of freedom to customize change rapidly. So that was one of our goals. But in the future, as we look to the next 10, 20 years, I think it's important that we actually prioritize this because the rate of change that we have in information management is growing. And it's somewhat scary, but we need to make decisions now to help us actually have open and available solutions. So some of the pictures that I've actually shown on the slides, if I can find the right slide here. These are some of the applications that we have on our LIMS system. Back again. There we go. These are some of the applications that we have in our LIMS system. There are temperature probes that are connected, our websites, photographs that our crime scene people actually take, run and batch systems, displays the way the analysts actually want to use it. And so that customizability is a very valuable thing for your staff. So let me start real quick with instrument interfacing. Both when you're buying instruments and actually when you're developing your LIMS system, both need to be flexible with input and output. Your instruments need to provide data in multiple ways, easy, and data out. Your LIMS system needs to be able to accept data and publish data easily, compatible, adaptable in many different ways. Usually our instruments are completely different, if not all. Usually they're different than our vendors. And so that compatibility, that flexibility is critical. So when you're buying your instruments, make sure that they have a lot of flexibility. One of the things I loved about Hewlett-Packard in the 80s was their ability to have macros. Those macros gave us a lot of freedom to be able to control our reporting and actually how our runs were actually going to happen. Both systems need to provide a lot of different file formats. Text files, CSV files, and so forth are not enough anymore. It's not just PDFs, there's XML, there's JSON, there's a lot of different types of products. The more options that you have with your LIMS systems, the more flexibility you're going to have down the road. Heaven forbid you should change your LIMS system, the rules are reset, and if you don't have the flexibility to use what you have now to adapt to the new LIMS system with your data, that could be problematic. Your instruments also should be networked, as they all are, without interfering with your existing network. Most instruments come with 4 or 5 pieces. Those pieces are usually networked, traditionally. When you plug that into your existing network, make sure there's actually no problems with compatibility. And the databases that the software and the instruments actually use in the back end need to be accessible. You need to be able to get to the data in those databases. Our breath alcohol instruments, for example, have a database. That database is used to publish the data to our website so the public can actually get it. If those databases are too proprietary, if they're too complicated, it's going to be problematic when you try to publish it. Now, when you're doing batching now, as we all are, and for us, it's most of the time it's DNA, antemortem toxicology, and postmortem toxicology, what you want is your staff not to have to enter anything. And that may not be completely realistic, but at the very least, at a minimal level, you only want them to enter information once. And that's probably at the beginning. For our controlled substance work, for example, our deputies log in the information. At that point, our staff never touch it except for to check the steps that they're actually following through. Barcoding helps with this, but if your LIMS system and your case management systems talk to each other, you can actually pass data from one step to the other without requiring your staff to re-enter it, to type information in, and of course make mistakes. So those repetitive entries are really where we're losing time, and we simply do not have the resources anymore to do things with staff sitting down at a desk, typing in results, typing in drugs, typing in quantities, and so forth. It all really needs to be automated. The more batching you have, the more critical this is. Our batches are actually growing in size too. I'll talk a minute about QTOFs, and if we could cue up the video from our AV staff. This is our QTOF batching system. And the system is actually going to be importing all the data from our QTOF. And this is a very, very small run of about 6 samples, but our QTOF can actually see up to about 200 drugs per sample. Now, when our staff were actually looking at this, what you're actually seeing is about 6 different samples. So you may have a run of about 100 or 200 different samples. Each of those samples, can we put that back up? There's a whole dialogue going on behind me, behind the curtain. Well, anyway, so if you're dealing with a run of about 100 to 200 different samples, and each of those samples can have 3, 4, 5 drugs, including metabolites and so forth, you can imagine the amount of entry that an analyst would have to do this manually. So being able to get the data out of your QTOF, being able to put it in your LIMS system without requiring your staff to actually type this information in is very, very important. In fact, our staff simply cannot do it. It's just too much work. With our LC triple quads, we're actually dealing with quantitative data as well. That quantitative information is additional stuff on every single sample. We don't have the time and energy anymore to actually sit in front of a computer and enter these results. Checking is important, but it needs to be automated, and that requires both the instruments and your LIMS system to be functioning correctly. So with automation, it's end-to-end. You want your reports to be done automatically, you want your tests to be scheduled correctly, you want the prioritization on the tests to be done for you based on your rules, of course, but you want it to be done automatically in your LIMS system. So if you do one replicate, the LIMS can schedule the second replicate. You can adjust which one is more important based on the type of analysis and so forth. You also want your analysts to be notified about the status of cases passively. Our staff happen to like getting emails. I suppose they could get text messages if they're a newer generation if they wanted to, but you want your LIMS system actually to tell you where you're at and prompt you proactively. And of course, you have to manage the chain of custody of those samples, but that can actually be done electronically as well. Now, when your LIMS system and your instruments are actually talking to each other, and again, the goal is no manual entry if possible, again, this is end-to-end. So you're starting with your client database. These are your stakeholders. They have data, property, and so forth in their databases. Trying to get it out of their system where you don't have to rekey in is critical. That goes to your LIMS system, then it goes to your instrument. Your instrument actually publishes it back to the LIMS system. You then get reporting, and then you go to the website. The goal for us, I think, should actually be doing all of this without any entry. It should be all automated, it should be streamlined, and quick as possible. We've had a couple of, I'll use the term incidents in Orange County, California recently. The first is the Golden State Killer, which you're probably all aware of, which has created a firestorm of discovery requests. We also had a very high publicized jail informant incident in Orange County. It was in the news a lot. One of the things that came out of this jail informant investigation with the district attorney's office and our sheriff's office was the records that are actually kept by those two offices. And so the end result of both of these is that, and I mean this literally, every single piece of paper we have in the laboratory is now discoverable. And so we're dealing with not just these cases, on every single case, the historical information, of course our case notes, instrument records, temperature probes, and something that I thought was completely sacrosanct would be personnel records, and I thought would never be crossed, it's being crossed. Our attorneys in California can actually be sued personally if they violate Brady. So they've interpreted that as give me everything. And if there's anything in your personal record that could impeach the witness, they feel they have a right to it, and our county council and the courts and the judges are actually agreeing with it. So everything that I've listed on the bottom of the slide is stuff that we're actually providing. Now, managing old paper records for something like this, just an incredible amount of time. So we're not quite there yet, but we're actually going to be electronic by the end of the next year for everything that we have. And that includes old microfiche records that we've had from the 80s. And that was a challenging project as well. If there's any case information in your emails, if you've typed in a case number, if you've named a defendant and stuff like that, it's for sure going to be discovered. If you've talked about a case, it's going to be discovered. So your email systems should be indexed so you can find that information on discovery, and I'm sure you've all dealt with this already, and integrate this into your LIMS system if possible so you have a record of your emails about cases linked to your cases. A lot of labs are actually working on paperless systems. Electronic case notes and records are important because your LIMS can actually serve those records quickly and easily. Electronic signatures is something that I don't think we've completely converted to, but it's something we're actually trying to do and something in the industry is actually moving towards. There's legal support now for what we're doing on electronic signatures, very important as well, so you don't have to sit and sign every single piece of paper. You can do a batch of reports as long as that signature can be traced directly back to a person. A lot of people are actually carrying two phones now. If you look around the room, you probably see that. If you have any case information on your phone, it's now discoverable. But more than that, and I'll talk about this in a minute, your mobile case management systems are becoming more frequent, and so your LIMS system is now not localized anymore. It's on a mobile device, it's field reporting, and so forth. In the industry, in the IT industry, there's something called web services, and web services are where systems can talk to systems. So you're taking your system and allowing other systems to actually query it, modify it, automate it, push data in, pull data out. There's no person in there. So those services sometimes are called APIs, or application programming interfaces. They're also hooks, but they're really one system talking to another. So with our case management systems, with the coroner's office, with our district attorneys, with our courts, our systems talk to each other. Our staff don't have to interject themselves. They don't have to moderate the information. They just talk directly. Our attorneys can get real-time information about what the case status is. Our coroners know what tests are actually being done on their samples. They don't have to call us. They don't have to bother us. We can push data back out to the district attorney so they see our blood alcohol reports immediately, for example. So having a LIMS system that is open like this, that gives you the flexibility of having APIs, will give you the ability in the future to say whatever I'm going to be doing, whatever instruments I'm buying, whatever my systems are going to look like, and whatever different software I'm going to be buying, I can have that software query my LIMS system, work with my LIMS system, rather than actually having this impedance mismatch or the inability of different languages that are actually talking. Many of us are actually participating in NIFLS. We're pushing our data out, and this is true for Foresight as well. As we do this, we want it to be automated. We don't want people to actually sit down at a computer and actually generate this data. A lot of our data is historical. Converting that is important as well. So as your LIMS systems work with other instruments, and other computers, other case management systems, you want to be able to have an open system that can actually be queried. Every third-party project or software product that you actually buy, you want it to fit in with your LIMS system correctly. Whether it's STRmix, whether it's GeneMapper, whether it's a system in a particular QTOF or LC triple quad, those systems, the more they can actually interface with your LIMS system without you involving yourself, the better. But this also involves our stakeholders. Our stakeholders have their own case management systems. You don't want them bothering you for routine stuff. It's better for them, it's better for you if you don't. Give them access to your information if possible. Now, you heard from Agilent earlier today how important security is, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can't do this. And so one of the ways we've implemented this in Orange County with our firewalls and security and so forth is by having multiple copies of the data. So we take our internal data that no one can actually touch, we push it out to our websites, we push it out to secondary servers so that other people can query it, look at it, get the information they actually need. Now, it requires us to push. There's a little bit of work, but that's all done again by our LIMS system. And it usually gives our clients the information they need in a real-time fashion. There are a lot more rules about what has to be encrypted in place as well. Some of this comes from HIPAA, but if you have biographic information, names, driver's license numbers, and so forth, that information now really needs to be encrypted in place in LIMS. So our case management system, our corrective action systems, our quality management systems, the software that we typically use, needs to be integrating with our LIMS systems as well. Our discovery should be automated. I mentioned about email systems. Your software in your DNA laboratories, like the communication between SDRMix and GMapper, that should be done as well as also. You heard Agilent talk about IoT earlier. IoT is your toasters being plugged into the internet, have their own web page, right? You can actually pop your bagel toaster out or make your bagel toaster actually work at 3 o'clock in the morning if you want to. You can check your bagel toaster from work. Everything's got a web page now. Your refrigerators can actually order milk. The ability for devices to be plugged in to the internet is what IoT really means, Internet of Things. For us, it's like our temperature probes. Our temperature probes are very, very small IoT devices that actually communicate with our LIMS system. You can get real-time information about the temperatures of your evidence storage areas. Everything, it could be your thermocyclers, it could be your CEs, from small devices to big devices, they're all interconnected now. I'd also suggest that you give your staff the ability to do searches. I don't mean just providing canned searches for them to be able to do. I mean letting them write their own searches. And so you have to be cautious with this, but letting them ask their own questions and actually query the information that you have in your case management system is going to open up a lot of doors because it gives them the freedom to actually look at alternatives and options. So preform searches and reports are great, but opening the door with your LIMS system, allowing them actually to think of things they need and want to know is important. That's what I mean by customized searches. The visualization of the data is important. The graph that you see on the lower right is our sexual assault kit receipts over the last 2 years. And as the graph shows, and this is what some of our DNA supervisors actually use, when we made the decision to actually collect the rape kits directly from the sexual assault nurses and skip the police departments, we made that as a county last year. Obviously, we got a lot of rape kits in early last year. Now we're getting more routine ones. But they can actually visualize this because they're able to query the system actual. So it's not a select few, it's not your IT staff only, it's not even your high-level managers. Everybody really should be able to query the system. Now, you don't want them checking on Larry's time yesterday when they're actually coming and leaving work. You have to be careful of that. But your case-related data is important. Foresight is great, and we've been pushing data to Foresight, but the beauty of Foresight 2020 is that this is, again, going to be automated. We can actually get much more real-time metrics being pushed to our partners. We don't actually have to spend the time to integrate with this information, but by pushing it, if you have a flexible LIMS system that can actually do this, you can push this information real-time, and so the data is more updated, obviously. You don't actually have to do the preparation of the data, and you can do it in multiple venues. It's not just Foresight, it could be NIFLS and other actual venues of how the information is going to be used. More importantly, you can give this data to your legal community. We provide metrics on how we're doing, our turnaround times and so forth to our clients that are not traditional, like our board of supervisors, for example, our law enforcement clients, and even our attorneys. So they have a good idea of how much time it's taking, how much it's costing, and so forth. So rapid changes and customizability are probably, as I bring this to a close, probably some of the most important things that you can do. Your LIMS system needs to work for you, not the other way around. We have very diverse systems. It's not one vendor that's providing every piece of software that we have in our laboratories. They have to talk to each other. We don't have the luxury to wait for 6 months of planning and development and then another 6 months of the software being written anymore. It's just not possible in the traditional software model. Now, vendors are getting really good about this because we have better dialogues with them, but we're dealing with issues on the order of weeks, sometimes even days, on getting solutions out to our clients. Granted, they're impatient, and granted, they need it, but it's our obligation, because the data is ours, to actually give this information to them. So are your databases proprietary? Can you get the information, and how long is it actually going to take you to give your attorneys or your stakeholders information that they actually need? So just an example of this, and again, this is one of the reasons why we decided to write the software ourselves. Our staff actually had a whiteboard on the wall for crime scene callouts. They liked the whiteboard. They could actually put different areas of Orange County on the whiteboard. They were using stickums for a while. We asked them in 2000 if they wanted to make this electronic. Of course, you know the answer is absolutely not. We like the whiteboard. So they came to us 2 years later, and you can guess what the question is. Can you make this electronic? And we said, of course we can. No. So this is actually an electronic whiteboard that looks like their little whiteboard they're used to. So there's very little change management for them. They actually can do this from their desks. They can do it on the wall now. They have very large screens, and it worked for them. I just wish they had done it 2 years earlier. This is our allele frequency calculator. Our DNA staff actually came to us and said, we have new NRC rules for homozygotes and heterozygotes. Can you implement this for us? And they came to us and wanted it a day later. So because we write the software ourselves and because the system is developed to be customizable, we were actually able to change the formulas they're actually using for their calculations within a couple days. When you buy a LIMS system, it's important that you set up a test system. So when we were doing training for our LIMS system, we actually had 20 or 30 computers set up in an area of our laboratory with what I call a false LIMS system, which is the exact LIMS system that we're actually using, but with not separate and completely modeled data. So they could do whatever they wanted to this system. They were actually able to play with it, they could test it, they could try things out. We weren't worried about anything changing, and they got to actually work with it. We did formal training. They could come up at any time and actually do it. Whenever you make a change, them being able to test it first is important. You've probably all heard the story about the undo in Apple software. Apple is one of the first companies to actually implement an undo, right? The reason why this works, this Command Z or Control Z that we have nowadays and it's so prevalent, is because we learn by trying something and then backing off if it doesn't work. If you have too many error messages, don't do that, and we still have these. If you don't do that, then staff kind of get frustrated because it stops them. They have to figure out, what do I do? It's much better for them to allow them to try something and to back off it. So that's what a test environment actually gives for you. We're also dealing with the possibility of huge and big data. When I say big, I mean big. Terabytes are passé now. We're actually looking at petabytes, petabytes, exabytes for everything. It's not just our MPS systems, it's our QTOF systems, it's our LC triple quad systems. Our photographs are becoming much higher resolution than they ever have been before. It will go up. Our storage needs are going to drastically increase. This is not just archival storage. This is actually live, real-time data that we're going to have to manage. And so preparing for what you're going to be doing with the backups is going to be even more important. You heard from digital evidence. It's not so much that our LIMS system is managing or indexing or keeping track of our evidence anymore. The evidence itself is in our LIMS systems. You need to prepare for, when you're storing a photograph, for example, how is your chain of custody on that photograph going to be managed? How do you know what's the original? How do you know who's touched it, right? Because that is the evidence. When it's submitted to us either electronically or on a CD or whatever, right? So manage that in your LIMS system is something that's a little more novel. We've traditionally all used barcodes, and barcodes are great. You can use radio frequency tags as an alternative for barcodes, but one of the things that RFID tags give you is the ability to passively scan systems. So you can put a reader actually in a door threshold and in an evidence room and actually scan all the evidence that's actually in that room passively and really get a true audit or what is actually moving through the doorway. Now the cost is a little bit higher with RFID, but I think really this is where it's going. We just have to manage a little bit of detail about how much information is being collected, sorting it out, and so forth, but something you might want to consider. I talked a little bit about archival and disaster recovery. In the interest of time, I'll skip this. I mentioned that our LIMS systems are now going mobile. Your staff are taking iPads with them. They're walking around your building. They're doing reporting in the field. So prepare for different types of software that are going to be accessing your LIMS systems, whether it's an iPad, whether it's a phone, they're going to be sitting at their desk, whether it's a website later. All that's going to be important. Lastly, I want to leave you with something called business intelligence. Our websites need to be, or we need to prepare with our websites for predictive planning, looking at our old data. So business intelligence is this model where you have this wealth of data. You might have heard it called data mining. Can it tell me anything about where things are going in the future based on what had happened in the past? So looking at Orange County, so I looked at our agencies that are submitting data, when they submitted it, what month they submitted it, when they received it. And just to give you an example of what this looks like, in plotting this, and not showing it to you, when I'm plotting this, you can actually see, so if you can't see the axes, the x-axis is the month, the y-axis is the number of cases, the z-axis, or going into the graph, is actually what year. So you should be able to see from this that for some reason in June and December, I get a lot more evidence. Right? I don't have a direct answer. I suspect what's going on, but that might give me the ability to say, I need to have more staff available to receive that evidence in June and December. Or if I can find out what disciplines those are, that's important. And I'm planning for the future by looking at past data, right? So that business intelligence piece is critical. Now, obviously, our casework is going up, too. You can see that as well. So thank you for letting me share a few suggestions. Hopefully, it's been helpful, and I'm here all week to answer your questions if you like.
Thank you, Bruce.